lots of little exercises that we're not necessarily going to do today, but I wanted you to have that sort of little, almost like a little workbook, if you like. And I've been very careful in how I've called the presentation, because I think it is really important to realise that, particularly in Scotland, I don't know about other areas, but particularly in Scotland, we've got a real aversion to that word selfish, and we have very many negative connotations. And I kind of want to turn that on its head. And I want to actually say that by being selfish, we're actually being kind and caring and compassionate to others. So hopefully that's one of the messages that you take away from today. But just a little bit about me, and you can read my bio on the Leading to Change website. But my background is organisational psychology, but my passion over the last sort of 12 years has been the neuroscience of leadership and high performance. And we wouldn't have been able to tell you some of the things that we're going to tell you today. Psychologists, we always had wonderful theories, and a lot of them have been upheld, but we didn't really have that wee little missing piece of scientific evidence, of hard evidence, if you like, that could actually really back up what we were theorizing. So my plan for today is really just take us through a sort of whistle-stop tour of how amazing the brain is and why we need to care for it. I want you to get a lot of thinking about yourself, your own resilience, your own self-care. What are those building blocks? And then I want to end up with a little 2 minutes where it's a little exercise that, if we do it for 2 minutes, gives us about 5 hours benefit and just not able to get as stressed. So if you see me rushing at the end, it'll be because I want to get you to that little 2 minutes and keep you to time. So that's kind of the plan for today. But if you wouldn't mind, while I'm just sort of chatting a wee bit, putting into chat, what do you know about caring for your brain? What sort of things do you already do, or what does it mean to you? How do you care for your brain? So I'm going to give you a wee minute to do that in chat, and hopefully Winky or Lindsay can tell me some of the thoughts that are coming out there. But as I said, sort of, 12, 14 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to talk about some of the things that we're talking about today, because we didn't really have that hard science. And we're often called the softer skills. And I see a lot of you are from various disciplines there, which tend to be called the softer skills. But I actually think they're the harder skills, those skills that deal with people, that deal with self-regulation, self-management. Those are definitely the hard things to do. Projects, timelines, etc. For me are some of the, they can be very challenging and very difficult to achieve, but they're actually easily measurable, whereas some of these softer skills. So we've really got some of these new technologies, and I think in sort of 15, 20 years time, we'll look back on a slide like this and actually laugh at how primitive we were. Actually brain science is the new frontier. So just getting a feel for what you know about caring for your brain. Winky, if there's any sort of interesting nuggets in chat, if you want to come in and let me know, that would be fantastic. But what we do know is that our brain is under increasing stress. And you can see here from this graph, our wee brain is changing. It's adapting every second of every day, but it can't keep up with the society pressures, the technology pressures. In olden times, and I'm talking maybe even 40 years ago, we maybe interacted with 15 people a day maximum, and that was a busy day. Whereas now we're interacting with 15 people before you even get out of bed. You're on LinkedIn, you're on your Facebook. And the brain finds that very, very stressful. Again, our constant on, we're never actually off anymore. And it's leading our brain into sort of areas that are actually not helpful for it. And actually, unless we take the time to offset some of that, is really not good for us. Winky, any sort of thoughts in chat before I move on?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a theme there about keeping hydrated and going for walks, exercise, about watching what you eat in the diet and sleep, and having enough rest will be a good things to do. However, I think there's recognition that we might know what we need to do, but do we have put in the time to doing it?
To actually doing it. Love that. Absolutely, that self-reflection, because I think we know a lot of what we should do, and particularly for our physical and mental health, but do we actually prioritize ourselves and be selfish? And I think that's the key point. And I'm going to present quite a lot of evidence and a lot of science today about why we should be selfish in order to help others. So it's not just for our own benefit, but it's really to benefit everyone else that depends on us and our organisations that depend on us. Because as we said, the wee brain is under increasing stress, and it's really because it's not designed for modern times. Our brains were designed, to keep us safe. And the threats that we usually would come up against were things like hunger, animals, predators. So there's a lot of complexity and a lot of redundancy in the brain that causes us stress as we move forward into these modern times and these sort of modern decisions. And I found this the other day myself. I was in the supermarket, hardly ever go to the supermarket, but I needed special shampoo. And last time I looked at shampoo, there was maybe 6 or 7 choices. I went down Asda and it was 2 aisles of shampoo. My brain was melting, having to make tiny micro decisions about greasy hair, dandruff, all of these things that you can have. The brain's not designed to do that and keep itself at optimum. So that's why I want to talk about what we need to do for this fantastic structure. And this structure is the most amazing thing that you can imagine. There are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the night sky or leaves in the Amazon. And we're actually making those new connections every second of every day. Your brain doesn't stop making connections until the day you die. From the minute you're born till the day you die, your brain is growing and changing. And it's a fantastic structure that we need to keep at its optimal. And I just thought that sort of last point might be really helpful for you of why you come out of meetings and you're like, oh, I'm exhausted. And it's this why when we're in deep thought or when we're dealing with difficult people, we're using up about 50% of our total energy, not the brain's energy, but our total energy. So it does feel like you've walked a marathon or you've climbed a Monroe with this amazing structure. So thinking about this was the first image ever taken of the brain in its complete functioning glory. And it's a beautiful thing, as you can see, absolutely everything firing in every place. But this is actually what your brain looks like if we don't self-care. And I know that's a funny slide, and I want you to remember that sort of juxtaposition. I also use a lot of images and stories because that's what the brain remembers. So the brain's not big on words, it's big on connections and how the connections are meaningful to you. So I want you to have that juxtaposition of the beautiful brain functioning at its optimal, and then your little Homer Simpson brain when we are under stress or when we haven't done any of those self-care things that you mentioned earlier. And the way that the thing that we need to do to keep ourselves at optimal is really this resilience and this adaptation. And the interesting thing about adaptation is it's knowing what you need to adapt to. So there's a whole sort of science behind this. And I always find Charles Darwin quite interesting because it's about survival of the fittest and I've got to be the strongest. He actually never said that. He actually said this. And in his writings, he spoke a lot about this, which is about collaboration. And I find that really important for us as humans, is that for us to survive and thrive, we need each other. But we also find each other quite threatening in very many ways. So typically, as I said, in ancient times, our threats were predators. Typically now our threats are each other, and the brain doesn't really know the difference. So it can be interesting to sort of think about that in terms of that difficult person that you just don't want to go into the meeting with, or that, that difficult team that you've got to work with. So really thinking about, what we need to do is to adapt and grow, but how we do that is with each other. So I'm going to talk you through today the 4 building blocks of resilience and really turn them into the 4 building blocks of self-care, because until we attend to each one of these, actually we're not going to keep ourselves at our optimum. So we really need to think about that self-awareness, our thinking around things, our mindset, how we cope with things, and then our sort of mental and physical fitness and health, and then the support and where we get it from. So I want to ask a wee question, and again, I think Lindsay's just going to launch a wee poll. We want to get an idea of where's your resilience strongest? Where do you think you actually do self-care quite well? Out of these 4 factors, where are you strongest? So I'll give you a wee minute just to complete that poll. Okay. And then Lindsay will let us see the results. Oh, wow. So we've got a clear winner for the self-awareness. We seem to think we're doing, so we're quite aware of what's going on for us. So that's quite interesting, because I'll sort of skip over some of that about the self-awareness that I don't need to do as much, and then maybe focus a wee bit more on some of the other areas. So that's really interesting that we think our self-awareness is good. Fab. Lovely. Good to see that. So back to what we were talking about in terms of building these 4. And I love that. I love this picture, really. And the reason why they tell us to put our own mask on first is if you're deprived of oxygen, you really can't do anything to help anyone else. So, you know, I'm trying to really build that message of take care of yourself first, because everyone needs you to be at your optimal for you to take care of them. So we're going to cover these sort of 4 areas. What is my stress? You know, what's my stress strategy? What does stress look like to me? I want to get a wee thinking about how we think and talk to ourselves. Again, very important factor in self-care is how we actually talk about ourselves and to ourselves. And then how can I stay healthy in brain and body? And then where can I access my support? And we've got some lovely things that we have in our healthcare that we can access, but also there's other areas that we might need more specialist help. So that's our kind of 4 areas that we're going to cover today. So as I said, there seem to be quite a lot about self-resilience. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but equally, if anything comes to mind, just put it in chat. And Winky and Lindsay will bring it to us. But really have a think about what's going on for me. And I love this little picture, because often we're not aware of what's going on for us, but certainly people around us are. You know, they can see the stress from us. And I wanted to bring to light, and I'm not going to cover this today in any great depth, but I just wanted to bring it to light about compassion fatigue, which is a particular stress reaction that people in our professions and our disciplines and in our work are very vulnerable to. So we are very vulnerable to this because we are those empathetic people, because we have that ability to empathize with people, and actually the willingness and the motivation to do something about it. So 2 kind of elements of compassion and its fatigue, and it's very different to empathy. So empathy is one of the elements, but then there's also that willingness to act and be able to do something about it. And there's a really interesting debate raging in sort of social psychology and neuroscience about the different areas in the brain, different neurochemicals, and why. And I hear this quite a lot. People link burnout, stress, compassion fatigue together, and they're very, very different. So I just wanted to posit that with you. And if you want to know more about that, drop me a line, and you know I can chat you through. But it's something that only we are very vulnerable to, is that. But thinking about stress in general, and I want to again get this message across that not all stress is bad. Actually, stress is good. We need it. We need that perfect harmony of neurochemicals to get us going in the morning. And I laugh when I say my teenage son basically lives in that green zone. There's nothing pushes him into peak performance unless it's on the Xbox. And there doesn't seem terribly much that pushes him over into the burnout and breakout, because everything's mañana, tomorrow. His favourite saying to me at the moment is calm it, Janet, which seems to be the teenage lament of telling parents to stop nagging them and bothering them. So if we're really living in that green zone, we're not doing enough to get us into that sweet spot. So what I'd like you to do, and not right now, but really have a think about what your curve is like, because all our curves are different, and actually start to plot yourself on the curve. What are the tasks that you do that really get your motivation up? What are the tasks that push you over? Or is it people? What are the people that you just can't drum up the energy to have any interactions with? So really have a think about your curve and where it sits. Is it very narrow and it takes a lot, but once you go, you go? Or is it very flat and you're living that sort of low levels of stress all the time? So really thinking about that and understanding what it's doing for you, because we really need to understand that while not all stress is bad, bad stress is, and it really affects both brain and body. And again, we kind of know most of what it does to our body, but we're really at this infancy of what it does to our brain. And actually only about 7 years ago, we thought it was only neurochemical changes that stress caused, whereas now we know it's actually structural and volume changes in your brain that happens with stress. And again, we thought it was chronic stress over months, now finding that as little as 10 days of continued stress changes that hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where you have a lot of your learning and your memory. And it's often why when we're under stress, memory is the first thing to go, because your hippocampus actually shrinks. So some of the effects that the stress has on us. And again, just sort of highlighted them there for you in kind of three main areas. That newer part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that basically shuts down. And if you remember the little Homer Simpson slide, we don't have access to that bigger brain that really helps us to manage our emotions, that really helps us to make good goal-oriented decisions. That bit no longer is available to us. Whereas the bit of the brain that is the little Homer Simpson brain, that fear, actually grows. It actually grows in structure and size and connection. So our amygdala, which is that older part of the brain, gets triggered by everything. And things that didn't used to trigger us now do. And again, obviously, some of those neurotransmitters that affect our mood, our depression, our trust, our sort of withdrawal. So definite things happening in the brain. And as I said, we kind of know what's going on here in the body. We all know these sort of things happening. But what I'm interested in is, where do you feel your stress? And again, Lindsay's just going to launch a wee poll, because I just want a wee idea of where you actually feel your stress in the body, because it's important to recognize that. Okay, a little bit of movement. We're getting a lot in that neck and shoulders, tummy, yeah, head. Nobody hands or feet. Nobody gets that tingling or anxiety. Dry mouth, throat. Absolutely love that. Great. So it looks like neck and shoulders. And the interesting thing about neck and shoulders, and it doesn't hold for everyone, but often when I'm coaching people and we're talking about things like this, it's often because you're quite cerebral. When it's in your neck and shoulders, you're actually thinking about things a lot, whereas some of the other ones are more, the tummy and the sort of knotting and the cramping and things. So it can just be interesting to understand what's driving your stress and where it sits. And then you can actually do something about it. So lovely. Thank you for that. Just thinking about where you feel your stress. But I want to think about, what's your stress strategy? Because again, being able to know what your stress strategy is lets you work with it better. So nothing that we do is to make drastic changes. What we want from the brain is to make little changes that become a habit. Because most of us know that all or nothing doesn't really work terribly well. Any of you have ever tried to give up anything or stop doing something, that all or nothing is really hard to do. Whereas if we can make sort of, habits and little changes as we go, it's a much healthier, much more productive way to change the brain. So what's your stress strategy? Are you a fight? Argue about it. And I think, again, Lindsay's going to just launch a wee poll. She's probably already done it and I can't see it. But so what's your strategy? Is it that argue, this isn't happening, I don't need to do this? Or is it, right, this is happening, I'm just giving it my all. I'm going to focus on this and nothing else. Is it the flight? I'll do anything else other than what I need to do. So if it's, doing a project that I don't want, I'll go and do these 5 projects that I love that are not really urgent, but are really fun to do. Or is it the panic, the freeze? And it's just that sense of overwhelm. And actually, I just don't know where to start. So I can't actually start anything. So if we think about, where do you sit? What's your strategy? Oh, we're getting a lot for almost equal for fight and flight. Absolutely. So going at it hammer and tongs, or avoiding it like the plague. Fabulous. Great. And it's really important to recognize that, not because you suddenly do something different because you do, but it's so that you can actually do something with it. And some of the things that you might do to work with your stress strategy is, when it's that fight, let's give it everything, or let's deny it's happening. Why not reach out to someone? Reach out to a really critical friend who's going to be honest with you and is going to give you that feedback about, this is totally unreasonable, Terry, or actually, I think this is something you really need to look, you really need to face, it is going to happen. Or is it the flight? You can maybe put a boundary around it, give it 30 minutes. Right, I really want to, take this time for distraction. So I'm going to go and do this presentation that I love doing. And then I've got to come back and do the task and the report that I don't like doing. So giving yourself that time. Or is it the freeze? Chunk it down. And sometimes 10 minutes too long. Chunk it down into 5. Chunk it down into 1. What's the thing I need to do in the next minute to move me forward? And then the next minute. And all of a sudden, you'll be 10, 15, 20 minutes down, and you'll have got got back into the zone. So really thinking about your strategy and what you can do about it there. Okay, and I also thought, again, I've put in lots of these little exercises for you to do, but what I typically would get my coachees to do is actually tick the ones that you do on both sides, because I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do some of the helpful ones, and I'm sure we do some of the unhelpful ones. And it's really just about trying to maximize those greens and minimize some of those reds. So recognizing what you're doing, when you're doing it, and what habit you're forming so that you can shift it into something else. And again, there's lots of research out there. This is not all inclusive, but just a few things that might actually help you cope a little bit more healthier than some of the unhelpful ones. But there's a reason why we do the unhelpful ones, because your brain actually likes doing some of that stuff. So again, it's about being gentle and kind to yourself about some of these the less helpful behaviors. There's a reason why we do them. So just gently move yourself over to the green. So as I said, put in lots of those little exercises for you to do when you're going through the slides. So that was all about the self-awareness. So now we're pretty aware of what's going on for us. We know what's happening. We know where it's happening. We know how it's happening. And we've got some little tips and techniques to get ourselves out of that. So fantastic. But what are we doing about our thinking? And I know most of you will have heard of growth mindset and fixed mindset, and how growth mindset is held up as the be all and end all. And actually that's not true. It's like anything else in life. We're never usually one or the other. We're usually a combination, and it can often be different situations or different people, again, that pushes us into that growth mindset, which is more about the learning and trying new things, not getting dispirited or not getting upset if you don't succeed. You just try to do something differently or try to do it in a different way. Whereas a fixed mindset is about, well, it's kind of all or nothing. I'm either smart or I'm not. And if I'm not smart, there's no point in trying to learn new things. So as I said, it's never really quite as simple as that. And what I thought, again, you could do here is really just map that for yourselves. So, I'm a psychologist. Psychologists love questionnaires. We love checklists. We love all of that kind of stuff. So I've put in quite a few of those for you so that you can actually sort of start to have a think about that for yourself. And looking about what are your approaches to these different things, because you'll be neither, you won't be all green and you won't be all red. You'll be a combination. But I guess it's about recognizing that and how you can change some of that so there is a more healthier response to things. For example, if your approach to effort is why bother, life's predetermined and things are going to happen, well, maybe we can do a little bit of work about that and actually seeing, well, if you try to do some of these things, you might not reach the big goal, but why don't you set yourself some little goals on that path to getting improvement and that path to mastery? So really just thinking about how I move some of the red over into the green again. So again, another wee exercise for you to do for yourself in that thinking and mindset. And something I also thought, and I honestly very rarely coach someone now where this doesn't come up in some sort of form, and it's about how I talk to myself. So the last bit was how I think about things, and but this is about how I talk and think about me. And we often all have that inner critic. And really what we know from research, and it's some fabulous research with people in the MRI scanners looking at what their brain's doing as they think about their inner critic. And what we need to do is work with that inner critic rather than try to stop it. And I love this little thing from Harry Potter. Any Harry Potter fans will see, Ron Weasley is terrified of spiders. And of course, I think it's movie 2 is covered in giant spiders. So they get Ron to imagine the spider with roller skates. So something that takes the sort of sting out of that. And that's what we need to do with our inner critic. We don't try to get rid of it. We thank it. And that immediately calms the brain. Another way to calm it is to name it. What's your inner critic called? I worked with someone during COVID, and for them it was anxiety around the virus. So we called it Vinny the virus, and we had a picture of Vinny. We changed Vinny's colour when he was doing different things. We made him funny, amusing. So actually visualize that. Get your inner critic in an amusing way. They're there to help you. That's why they've become ingrained in you. They're typically from parents, teachers, other important people in our lives who are trying to keep us safe and trying to tell us, don't do that in case you fail, because we don't want to see you fail. But now we're old enough, we're experienced enough to say thank you to our critic, and I'm actually good enough. I'm a great person. I'm doing my best here. What's a statement? And we call that the intention statement. What's your intention statement or your mantra that makes you feel strong? And just thank your inner critic and replace it with the intention. And that is really trying to treat yourself as a friend, really thinking about that. How do I talk to myself? I would never tell my friends some of the things I say to myself, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're not good enough. You would never say that to a friend. So why don't you deserve that compassion? So really think about that inner critic. Then we're thinking about our mental and our physical health, and really thinking about how do we game what's in our brain and what's in our body. Now, there's these lovely neurochemicals, as we said, in our brain and in our body, and we can actually use them. If we know how to create them and we know what they do for us, then we can actually start to use them in a slightly better way. So for example, that dopamine, that feel good, and often we'll get dopamine from things like chocolate, or we'll get dopamine from presents, anything that's new, novelty, humor, laughing. And often in my workshops, I'll play a little video for people and it gets them laughing and it gets them in that social situation, because it floods the brain with dopamine and oxytocin, the trust hormone, just because it makes you much, much more receptive. If you remember at the beginning, the slide of the beautiful brain working in all its glory, that's what it was doing. It was actually working with the right amounts of dopamine. So thinking about the other major chemical there that was in Amy Arnstein's curve is the noradrenaline, or the cortisol, whatever you want to call it. And that's about generating that alertness, because if you remember the curve, unless we're alert, we stay in that green zone where we can't actually learn, we can't actually grow, we can't actually develop. So in that green zone, if you remember of the curve, which is about being bored, being inactive, not interested in anything, we need enough of this cortisol to really push us up into that sweet spot and into that sort of, that peak performance. And I know everyone will have experienced that. I know you'll have experienced days that just flew in and you got so much done, and you feel so satisfied and productive at the end of it. And what that is your brain chemicals have been really in that right space for quite a long period of time, allowing you to work in that sweet spot. So really thinking about that curve and how you get yourself up there. And again, game some of this. Some of the things that you can do for your adrenaline is really set yourself some little goals, or make it urgent. In the next 15 minutes, I need to get that report finished. Oh, that generates a little bit of urgency. That generates a little bit of, insight or novelty for you. Use different colours. Colours are a great one for generating dopamine as well. And if you need to think critically, using red is really good. So, often if I'm doing a report, I'll write it in red and then change it into the black. Or if you want to be creative, writing in blue or using blue pen, etc., can help you be more creative. So really think about how you get the best from your brain and how you gamify that brain. And again, don't be afraid of your emotions. The emotions are critical for our mental health. And we've spent a lot of time there thinking about where our emotions sit. Where do they sit in the body? And I showed you the Menma slide around how you can feel these emotions in different areas in your body. So really think about, what can I use that for? If I'm happy, how might I use that? Well, actually, happy is really good if you need to be creative or innovative or try something new. That's the best time to do it. Or if you're grappling with something really difficult and you just need to let it go, do it when you're happy. Don't do it when you're sad or anxious or alert. Get the right chemicals there. Again, sadness is really good for critical thinking. So if you've got something that, that's really important that you need to really analyze, feeling that wee bit lower is not such a bad thing. Don't be frightened of it. And again, anxiety, the brain doesn't know the difference between anxiety, excitement, surprise. It's how you tell the brain what it is. And the interesting thing I said earlier about the brain, being designed for olden times. So your brain sees a stimulus and it has a reaction. Your brain doesn't know what that reaction's for until you tell it what it's for. So we have that rush of chemicals, but you need to tell your brain what those chemicals mean. So you can either tell them, oh, this is exciting, this is something I want to try, something new, something fun, or you can say to your brain, actually, I'm really terrified by this and I don't want to do it, because it's the same neurochemicals that your brain produces. So you have that control to tell your brain and body what you want to do with it. And I think that's really important to recognize you are the master of your brain and your body. You are the narrator. Couldn't get that word out there. So you're the narrator of that. So really thinking about your mental and physical health. And earlier on, when we put in chat, what do you know about caring for your brain? You actually came up with a lot of these. So I know you know a lot of this is what you need to do, but do you know why? And have you actually thought about why is nutrition important? And how is that important? So we think about nutrition, for example, our brains and body are mainly water. So if you're not replenishing that, your brain can't function. So again, we go from the beautiful, colourful lady to the Homer Simpson brain when we're dehydrated, when we're hungry, when we haven't had, the right combinations. And another reason is that the brain loves chocolate. The brain loves sugar. In fact, we know from studies that if you give rats the choice of whether they would rather choose sugar or cocaine, which, as we all know, is a very highly addictive drug, they choose sugar every single time. Sugar is 100 times more addictive than cocaine. So really thinking about that, there's reasons why your brain does what it does. And what we're asking you to do is just stop, pause, and think about, well, what else could I do here? Can I reach for the chocolate bar? Absolutely. It gives you that immediate boost. It's okay. But recognize, 20, 25 minutes later, you're going to have a sugar drop and your brain's neurochemicals are going to plummet. So recognizing if you need that 20-minute boost, then go for it. If you need something more sustainable, then go for the healthier, slower release. Things like nuts or fruit, for example, and not the terribly sugary fruits, but it's like a banana, for example. So cutting down on those. And again, the eat strategically one, I think, is really, really important. We all know that it takes 20 minutes for our brain to recognize that we've actually been eating, but how many of us actually take the time, or we sit at our desk and we scoff down a sandwich while we're typing? So your brain never actually gets the message that it's full. So think about this: slowly chewing, 10 chews, or eat half now and half later, has that huge impact on the brain, both from that sustainable blood sugar release, but also maintaining that correct balance of the hormones and chemicals that we need. Again, exercise, we all know it's important, but why is it important for the brain? Surely exercise is a body thing. Actually, no. We actually know that exercise is one of the key things to keep your brain healthy, but there are different ways to do that. So we need to switch it up. We need to game that again, set goals, little things that you can do, build it into a habit, even if it's only 10, 15 minutes a day. Build it into that habit and routine. Your brain loves habit and routine. And what we know about the brain is it takes about 1,000 repetitions before something goes from the newer part of the brain that we constantly think about to that older part of the brain where it's a full-blown habit. That's why we talk about muscle memory. Anyone who does sports or anything like that, karate or whatever, you've thrown that punch so many times that you don't even think about it. But you would have had to throw it 1,000 before it does that, or even drive in a car. Think about those habits and how you form them. But then think about, what type of exercise do I want to do? Do I want that immediate boost for my brain? Because if you do, then you should get your quadriceps moving. So if you want an immediate boost, either get up and march on the spot, do a bit of dancing, anything that gets your the big muscles in your legs moving. Go up and down stairs. that will give you that immediate boost, is moving the legs. But if you want to do other things, like if you want to do strength, etc., things like weights have different effects on the brain. So weight training has very different effects on the brain versus dancing or versus aerobic exercises. So really think about, what do I want to do from my exercise and how can I switch it up and do different things? So the time thing is interesting, because again, you brought it all up in your initial thoughts there about the time, making the time for this. But have you actually thought about how you use the time that you do have? Because again, even though we're saying you've got that wonderful, beautiful, colourful brain that works at its optimum, you cannot have that 24/7. That is limited. And we think it's limited to about 2 hours a day that we have access to that newer part of the brain. So really think about how you want to use that really effective function. And I put a few sort of suggestions in there. And I know you might laugh about the email one, but honestly, it's like that shampoo analogy I was giving you. These little micro decisions that you make every time you read an email, all those emails that you're copied on that are actually not for you, but it's just someone letting you know, all of that drains the new part of the brain. It doesn't drain the old part of the brain because it's got infinite resources, but that newer part of the brain has only got about 2 hours a day. So really think about, when's the most effective time to really sit down and do my emails. Do I do a quick triage in the morning and then, have an hour set aside in the afternoon where I actually go through what I need to do? Is much, much healthier for the brain. Again, thinking about your to-do list. Can you make some of those decisions the night before? What's coming up tomorrow, and can I actually make a couple of decisions tonight so that I know those are off my plate, and actually again free up that the prefrontal cortex in the morning. And again, what we know about labeling things really calms the brain down and really lets it function at its optimal. So if you can label your tasks into categories and actually think about what's urgent, what's critical, what's a nice to do, and do those important things first, is much, much healthier for your brain. And that will be those days where you sort of leave, you leave work feeling really satisfied and productive, because often we can leave work and we've been really productive, we've answered 1,000 emails, but you don't have that satisfaction of actually achieving anything. Whereas the satisfaction in the brain comes from those big tasks. And we can usually only tackle about 2 or 3 of those a day. And it's really important to, tackle them as early on as you can. Again, I'll often say to groups that I'm working with, any difficult meetings that you're having, please don't have them at 7 o'clock at night, when that newer part of the brain that allows us to be working at optimal, make better decisions, that's gone by then. It's freshest in the morning, so have your difficult meetings in the morning, make your decisions in the morning, and use your afternoons and your sort of early evenings for more of the sort of brainstorming, creative, coming up with ideas rather than making decisions. So really think about your time and how you use it. And I know you mentioned sleep as well, and I also do another presentation called Sleep is the New Botox. Because we really need to think about, if you want to be at your optimum, if you want to be at your healthy, then we need to prioritise the sleep. Huge amounts of research on why we need to do that. And I say, if you saw some of the the facts around what happens when we don't have that sleep, it is actually frightening. If you're regularly missing 2 hours sleep for 3 nights, so 3 nights only, and you've missed 2 hours sleep, it's like going into work on 2 beers. And none of us would do that. So really thinking about, every day we come in sleep deprived, every day we think, oh, I'll go to bed later, I'll get up earlier. Most of us don't prioritize that sleep and that quality of sleep. So really think about what you can do about it. What is your bed hygiene? What is your routine? And the brain loves habit and routine. So again, this was one of the big things that I did. I'm a terrible night owl. And I don't know if there's any other night owls out there, but I so wish I was a lark. The larks are much, much healthier, both in brain and body, than the night owls generally, because it's much more of a healthy circadian rhythm. But thinking about that allowed me to change my routine. And even in the weekend now, I used to spend my whole weekend going, catching up on my sleep into whenever you feel like it. Whereas now I only allow myself an hour. So I allow myself an extra hour for that lie-in, so that I'm not jet lagged by the Monday morning. Because if you are saving up all your sleep for the weekend, come Monday, you're 2, 3, 4 hours jet lagged effects. So it's quite critical to think about how you manage your sleep and the quality and the quantity. Again, another thing about sleep is it's very linked to positivity. So sleep, stress, and positivity are very closely linked, and it can be hard to tackle your sleep. It can be hard to tackle your stress, but it's quite easy to tackle positivity. Keeping things like a gratitude journal, a checkout of the day journal, if you don't like the word gratitude, but just 3 things that went well, 3 things that you're proud of. Things like that will really boost your positivity, which in turn boosts your sleep and lowers your stress. And again, some of the things that you might want to do around your routine are thinking about your bedrooms. And we're moving into the winter when we all like to be nice and cozy, but that's actually not good for the brain. It's much, much better for the brain to have a slightly cooler room. And obviously avoid things like alcohol, caffeine, exercise before bed are really not good. Caffeine's got about a 6-hour half-life. So if you have a coffee at 2 o'clock, and by 8 o'clock, you've still got about 50 grams of caffeine in your system. So thinking about the later you have coffee, the longer you're unable to get to sleep. So really thinking about that. And definitely the short naps. If your body's saying you need a quick nap, then have a 20-minute nap. Really get that refresh. No more than 20 minutes, or you move into a different sleep phase, which is actually more detrimental. So you need to keep it at that 20 minutes, but that 20 minutes will revive and recharge you. So really thinking about that. And I think Lindsay's put the poll around, so what we can do. So I'm just going to, I don't know if you guys have already seen it, just to see where we need to put some of our focus. Oh, so most of us are saying all of these, so we could actually make some improvements in all of them. So that's quite interesting. And then we've got sort of very even for the other 4. So that's right. So and again, I'm not advocating all of a sudden you change everything that you do, but why don't you pick one? Why don't you pick one, make it into that habit, and then choose another one? Because that's what the brain likes to do. The brain likes to do things often. It likes to make them into habits so that it actually doesn't need to process them anymore. Maybe you do something well, you brush your teeth, and I heard one of my coaches say, she says, I don't keep the gratitude journal, but as I brush my teeth, which I do every night for 2 minutes or so, I go over the things that I'm really proud of that day. And it's like, wow, fabulous. You're actually building a new habit into an existing habit. So can you do something like that? Choose one and build it into a habit, get it strong, and then choose another, and really start to think about those safety nets and what's really working for you. And again, I've just given you the little tick box so that you can actually see, because I think, again, the brain loves to see things in black and white. The brain doesn't like to keep it in its head. Again, it uses up all of that prefrontal cortex, which exhausts us. So if you're trying to remember something, get it onto a post-it note, get it into your little book that you keep, or your notepad. Get it off the brain and down onto paper, and you'll free up a lot of that prefrontal cortex. So what can we do in terms of where can we get that support? And it might be something as simple as a listening ear. I just need a friend to listen. I need a colleague to listen. Just let me vent. Just let me get it out my system. People who understand what I'm going through. Or do I need something a little bit deeper, maybe a little bit more structured? There's a fantastic resource in our National Wellbeing Hub. NES itself has amazing resources too to go along with the Wellbeing Hub. I'm sure all of our boards have local services that we can tap into, whether it's chaplaincy or psychology or spaces for listening, whatever it might be in your board. How do you tap into that? And then what about friends and family? You know, so the first one is about that people that maybe understand what you're going through, but then you can also go to friends and family who don't understand and maybe who have a slightly different perspective, and then allow us to think about things a little bit differently. So really thinking about reaching out and where do I get that support from? And the final thing that I've put in for a little exercise for you is the spell my name or the 3-letter word. And I love this. I do this quite regularly because it's quite fun. And it's just choose a word or choose I've done my name many times. I've done all my family. But choose, you're better with a 3-letter word, and then just do the 3 things that it tells you to do. For example, say we choose the word day. So you're going for D. So you might draw a feeling or a thought. And remember what I told you earlier about that inner critic, getting things down as a visual, getting things down onto paper. But why don't you draw your inner critic? What do they look like? You know, what are they making you feel? What sort of colour? All of that calms the brain immediately. And then you go to the A. So in this moment in time, what's going on in my brain, body, environment, and what do I need at this very second in time? Oh, I haven't been to the bathroom. Oh, I haven't had a cup of tea. You know, in this moment, what do I need? And make it happen for yourself. And then the why, which is the yoga for 10 minutes. You can fill in your own here, but you might just do a few wee stretches, get up there, as we said, move those big muscles in your leg, stretch them out, you know, do something that actually gets them working and gets that blood and oxygen flow going. So it's been a whistle-stop tour, and I do realise that. And I think before we do our little stress reliever, Lindsay's got one last poll for us, which is about what are you taking away from the self-care is not selfish that you found useful today? And again, that's to help you, but also to help us gather a little bit of data. And we just thought we'd maybe put it into a word cloud. Again, if you want to put anything into chat, then please do. But what are you taking away from all of the science, all of the evidence, all of the knowledge today that you can put into practice? Yeah. Sleep, self-care. So just the actual concept of self-care is coming up as very large. The time, absolutely. And again, we've got you know, I've got another presentation called work an 8-hour day in 5, which is all about that those 2 different parts of the brain and how to maximize that prefrontal cortex in terms of your time. And I would not talk to you about time management, and there's a few of my colleagues on the call today, and they'll know that I would never dream of talking to you about time management, but I'll talk to you about cognitive management and how to really ease that load. So please, you've got my email, you know, you've got the Leading to Change network to reach out to. Please reach out and we'll give you any information that we can. So just getting some time for yourself, understanding the PFC. PFC is a really interesting one to understand, you know, how, because those 2 parts of the brain really compete. So it is very important. Sleep, napping is okay. Absolutely. I am an absolute, in Australia, we used to call it a nana nap, and having that, you know, as I said, settle down, set your alarm for 20 minutes. Don't go over that, and you will feel so much more refreshed. Exercise, brain care, love it. Friend time, great. So quite a lot of things around both brain, body, and mind, which is lovely there. So thank you all. Thank you all for that. I am going to do our little 2-minute stress reliever. So what I'm going to do now is just pull that back up. So this is a little app. I used to work for this company, My Brain Solutions, who are now Total Brain, and unfortunately they've taken away access for us in Europe at the moment because they're revamping. I've been asking them, saying, please come back to Europe, but at the moment they're not. But you can go on and access it through their website. It's now called Resonant Breathing if you want to go on and just have a go on their website. But what our research showed is that if you do this little deep breathing for 2 minutes, it gives you about 5 hours of just not being able to get as stressed. And I'm going to ask you not to close your eyes. The video will, the lungs will inflate, and I'd like you to breathe in through your nose. And as the lungs deflate, breathe out through your mouth. Okay, and that's all we need to do. But please don't close your eyes, because we found that it's not as effective. There's still some part of your visual cortex that processes when you close your eyes. Whereas if we focus the visual cortex, it's much, much more productive. So I'm going to start the little video, and it's breathing in through the nose as they inflate and breathing out through the mouth as they deflate. So here we go. Okay, so just breathing in. And out. And relax. Oh, and you'll probably have noticed that my speech has dropped a whole octave, and it's got about 10 times slower. And I actually did this before our presentation today, but I get so excited and passionate about the material that I get quite fast. You can imagine when I lived in Australia, all I got was, could you slow down? We didn't get any of that. But this little exercise really does change those chemicals and that oxygen flow. So I wanted to ask, is anyone lightheaded from doing the little breathing technique? And again, you can just put it in chat, but it's just for something for you to think about. I've been doing that exercise now probably for about 11 years, and I still get lightheaded because I'm obviously a very shallow breather. You know, in changing that rhythm of your breathing really affects your blood flow, your oxygen. So please don't try and stand up if you are feeling a little bit lightheaded. Just let it balance itself out. But as I said, that should allow you about 5 hours of just not being able to feel as stressed, and just keeping that little bit calmer. So if you're going into difficult meetings after this, you know, hopefully you're a little bit calmer for that. But we've got a couple of minutes, so I was just going to see if there was any questions or anything that you wanted to reflect on. You know, I've really enjoyed today. You know, it was a whistle-stop tour. I was saying to Winky and Lindsay on Monday, I don't know what to leave out, because it's also, you know, it's also interesting and so fascinating. Sarah's saying it will cover school pickup time. Perfect. Love it, Sarah. Absolutely. Now, someone's got their hand up. Can I just see who's got their hand up? Caroline, I think Winky can let you come off mute and share with us.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate everything that you've taught us throughout this last hour, Terry. My question is, I was thoughtful when you were talking about brain fog earlier and the brain being overwhelmed and brain fogged and the world that we're living in. And then I was thinking about how good we're doing it. Well, you could question whether we're doing good, but in terms of menopause and that whole agenda around brain fog and support, are we at risk of labelling the anxiety and the overwhelm and the things that are going on and the workload? Are we at risk of labelling it for things like menopause, etc., and not actually focusing on us spending the time on self-care? And does that make sense as a question?
I think it does, Caroline. I think it's a great question, and there's a whole load of research now about the female brain, and the brain and menopause. And there's a fantastic researcher, and she's a lovely lady, Dr. Sarah Mackay, who talks a lot about the female brain. And I think in answer to your question, I would say, what we know about our thinking, our mindset. Absolutely, we can reframe how we think about things, how we talk to ourselves. But equally, that self-awareness piece of during menopause, during various, even if you've got a cold, even if you've got the flu, all of those things have huge effects on the body and brain. And recognizing that that's happening, rather than trying to just cover it. So, and another big one is things like grief. Sadness has huge effects on brain and body, and recognizing that times like that are maybe not the best time to make some of those really important decisions is reframe enough, Caroline. But I think there's definitely things like the menopause that have huge effects on the brain, and we shouldn't discount those. And equally, there are also times where we could perhaps do a bit more and help ourselves reframe things. And I think if you work on those 4 building blocks, the awareness of what's going on, coupled with the thinking and the mindset, and then how am I actually going to make some improvements mentally and physically and support myself through that, is definitely the way to go. So I don't know if that answers it.
It does. I think, it does. That's really, really helpful. I suppose what I worry about is, do we get into the point of labeling things and go, oh, your brain fog, you've got brain fog and that's because of your menopause, or it's because of a medical condition, when actually it's because of the design of the way that we work in terms of how we function in our NHS life. And should we maybe think more about that? Just what I was hearing from you about.
I would say that's a wonderful question to pose yourself. What's going on for me here? Is it physical? Is it mental? Is it work? Is it environment? What's actually going on here? And give it the right name. If it's physical and I need X, Y, and Z to help with that, or is it my thinking around, oh my gosh, there's so many deadlines, or is it actually there's overwhelm? I've got 50 decisions to make before I even have my first cup of coffee, and that's exhausting for the brain. The brain gets exhausted by all of those little tiny decision make. So if you can make things a habit and make things routine as much as possible, that frees up that part of the brain so that you don't need to think about it. I'm a great advocate of having the same breakfast every day, because I can't be bothered thinking about what to have. And things like that are quite exhausting for the brain.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Anything else? I haven't had a quick look in chat.
I think, Terry, just been so brilliant that there been people who would like to hear more from you. I think there's requests about compassion fatigue, cognitive management, and also, more importantly, a session about sleep.
The sleep. Yeah, and I think that there are things that we're all struggling with, and it's interesting Caroline asked that question there, because it's how do we reframe those things that are really happening for us. Compassion fatigue is real, lack of sleep is real. These things are real, and they do have huge effects on our brain's ability to be at its optimum. And I think that's an important thing to recognise, Winky, just recognising actually this is not a good time to make that really big decision. I've only had 4 hours sleep. It can take all that pressure off.
So that's great. Thank you very much, Terry, for
my pleasure,
sharing with us all your wisdom. And no doubt, actually, for sure that we're going to bring you back for next year for
you know
other
me,
sessions.
I would talk forever. And I will. I saw someone asking about the slides. I will send them to Winky and Lindsay in PDF form, so that you can self-coach or take others through. And please just get in touch if there's more we can do. And I look forward to doing more in the future. Thank you all so much.